The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rolling hills and thick forests near the river. The young man, Thomas, had been walking for hours, his boots heavy with mud from the wet ground, his pack weighed down with simple provisions. He had traveled far from his small town, seeking work and hoping to find adventure in the wilderness. The air smelled fresh and earthy, filled with the sound of birds and the gentle rush of the river that ran alongside the trail. Thomas was used to solitude, the quiet hum of nature becoming his companion on long walks. He often thought about the stories his grandfather told him, about brave men who wandered the frontier and helped those in need. He liked to imagine himself in those stories, though he had never faced real danger. As he approached a bend in the river, he noticed a sudden movement in the water. At first he thought it was a deer struggling to swim, but then he saw her, a young Apache girl, her dark hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with fear, fighting against the strong current. Without thinking, Thomas dropped his pack and ran to the riverbank. His heart pounded in his chest. He had never been a strong swimmer, but he knew he could not leave her there. He waded into the water, the cold river biting at his legs, the current tugging at his feet. Each step was a struggle, but he pressed on until he reached her. "Hold on. I've got you," he shouted, extending his arms. She looked at him with a mix of terror and relief, her small hands clutching at his shirt. With a great effort, Thomas wrapped his arms around her and pushed against the current, struggling to carry her back to the shore. Every step was a fight against the river's force, and he felt his strength fading, but he refused to let go. Finally, with one last push, they reached the shallow water near the bank, and he collapsed on the wet grass, pulling her close to keep her safe. Both were breathing hard, their bodies trembling from the cold and exertion. The girl sat up slowly, brushing water from her face. Her eyes were bright and alert, scanning the surroundings as if she expected danger at any moment. Thomas noticed her clothes were soaked, clinging to her small frame, and he quickly offered her his coat. She hesitated, then accepted it, wrapping herself in the warmth. There was a silence between them, filled only by the sound of the river and the rustling trees. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but urgent. "You saw me, and now you know my secret. You must listen carefully," she said. Thomas looked at her, puzzled, unsure what secret she meant. Her eyes were wide and serious, showing fear that went beyond anything he had ever seen. She took a deep breath and began to explain. Her tribe, she said, was in danger. Rival groups were threatening her people, and if she returned alone, they would surely capture her. She needed help, and she needed it quickly. Thomas listened intently, trying to understand. He had heard of conflicts between tribes before, but he had never imagined being part of one. The girl spoke of loyalty, honor, and survival, using words that painted a vivid picture of her life and the dangers she faced. Thomas realized that helping her was no longer just an act of kindness. It was a matter of life and death. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the fear in her eyes, and he knew she was telling the truth. I don't know what I can do," he admitted, unsure if he was capable of helping her. She looked at him, her gaze piercing yet pleading. "You can save us both," she said. "If you refuse, they will find me, and then you will be in danger too. There is only one way to protect ourselves." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Her words were shocking, and he felt a wave of responsibility wash over him. The girl's trust in him was clear, and he could not ignore it. He nodded slowly, his mind racing to understand the gravity of the situation. She explained further. In her culture, a bond between two people could act as protection. By declaring themselves united, they would be seen as connected, making it harder for enemies to harm either of them. It was not a choice made lightly, and it carried serious consequences. Thomas struggled to grasp the full meaning, but he could sense her desperation. She was not asking for friendship or temporary help. She was asking for a commitment, one that could change both of their lives forever. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the river. Thomas realized that they needed to move to find a safe place before nightfall. The forest could offer some cover, but it was also full of dangers. Wild animals, rough terrain, and unknown travelers who might not be friendly. He helped her to her feet, and together they began to walk along the riverbank, careful to stay hidden among the trees. Every step was cautious, every sound amplified in the quiet wilderness. Thomas felt a mix of fear and determination. He had never faced such a situation, but he knew he could not abandon her. As they walked, the girl told him her name was Niley. She was quiet at first, but slowly she began to share more about herself. She spoke of her family, the traditions of her tribe, and the lessons she had learned growing up in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Thomas shared some of his own life too, though cautiously, aware that trust had to be earned. They began to understand each other, not just as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as two people facing a shared challenge. The tension between them was real, but so was a growing sense of respect and connection. By the time they found a small clearing suitable for rest, darkness had begun to fall. They built a small fire, its warm glow illuminating their faces. The crackling flames provided comfort, but the knowledge of danger lingered in the back of Thomas's mind. Nayeli huddled close to him, not just for warmth but also for reassurance. She glanced around constantly, her instincts sharp, always alert for signs of trouble. Thomas admired her bravery. Despite her fear, she had faced the river alone, trusting him enough to be rescued. As they ate their meager supper, she returned to her earlier plea. "Thomas, I need you to understand," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "By staying with me, by agreeing to what I ask, you are not just helping me survive, you are protecting yourself too. We are connected now, whether you fully realize it or not, and there is no turning back." Thomas looked into her eyes, the weight of her words pressing on him. He felt fear, yes, but also a growing determination. This was no longer about adventure or curiosity. It was about life, honor, and responsibility. The night deepened, stars appearing above them like distant fires in the sky. Thomas stayed awake for a long time, watching the fire and thinking about the decision ahead. He had never imagined being part of something so serious, so urgent, yet despite the danger, he could not shake a sense of purpose. Nayeli's trust in him, her courage, and the quiet strength she carried inspired him. He realized that this moment, as frightening as it was, could define who he was. Nayeli, too, remained awake, staring into the flames. She thought of her family, of the threats looming over them, and of the stranger who had risked his own safety to save her. She knew that asking for his help in the way she had was bold, perhaps frightening but necessary. Survival sometimes demanded difficult choices. She had placed her life, and now his, into the hands of someone she barely knew. Yet there was hope, fragile but real, that together they could overcome the dangers ahead. Morning would bring new challenges. Thomas knew that. They could not stay in one place. They would need to move quietly, carefully, avoiding any who might see them and understanding that each step could be the difference between life and death. But for now, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet companionship, they allowed themselves a brief moment of peace. They were two strangers bound by circumstance, yet slowly beginning to understand the power of trust and courage. The river flowed gently beside them, its waters glinting in the last light of the sun and the first hint of the moon. It had been the place of her danger, but also of their meeting and perhaps the start of a bond that could carry them through the trials ahead. Thomas realized that life sometimes demanded choices that seemed impossible, yet through courage and commitment, even strangers could find strength in each other. Nayeli's eyes, dark and alert, met his, and in them he saw both fear and hope. He took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. "I don't fully understand everything yet, Nayeli, but I won't leave you. We'll face this together." She nodded, relief and gratitude shining in her face. For the first time since the river, she felt a measure of safety, not because the danger was gone, but because she was not alone. Together they would navigate whatever lay ahead, relying on courage, quick thinking, and trust. And perhaps over time, something stronger, something like friendship, respect, or even deeper connection, could grow between them. As the night deepened, the fire burned low, and both of them finally allowed themselves to rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they were ready to face them together. Morning broke gently over the forest, the sunlight streaming through the tall trees and glinting off the river that ran nearby. Thomas woke first, feeling the chill of the early day and the dampness from the previous night. He carefully shook off the last remnants of sleep and checked that Nayeli was still nearby. She had curled up under his coat for warmth, but now she stirred, stretching her limbs and blinking in the morning light. Her eyes, dark and alert, held a mixture of determination and quiet anxiety. Thomas offered her a small smile, and she returned it faintly, a sign of trust growing between them. After a simple breakfast of bread and dried meat, They began their journey along the river, moving carefully through the thick underbrush. Thomas kept his eyes and ears open, alert to any signs of danger. Wild animals, unfriendly travelers, or the rival groups that Nayeli had warned him about. She walked beside him with surprising agility, her small frame moving with the grace and confidence of someone used to navigating the wilderness. Occasionally, she would glance around and give him a warning with a hand gesture, pointing out a hidden route, a low-hanging branch, or a trail that could lead them astray. As they walked, Nayeli began to tell Thomas more about her life. She spoke of her family, the elders in her tribe, and the traditions that guided her people. Her words were careful yet filled with a quiet pride. Thomas listened intently, fascinated by her stories and the way she described a life so different from his own. He realized that behind her fear and urgency there was courage, intelligence, and a deep connection to her community. Nayeli was not just a girl in danger. She was someone with knowledge, strength, and a life worth protecting. Their journey was not easy. The forest was thick, with twisted roots and uneven ground that made every step a challenge. At times, Thomas stumbled, his boots catching on hidden roots, but Nayeli was quick to help him regain his balance. They crossed streams and climbed small hills, always keeping an eye on the river as both a guide and a potential escape route. The sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, the calls of birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of animals. Each sound made Thomas more aware of his surroundings and more attuned to the danger that could be waiting around the next bend. By midday, they reached a small clearing with a stream flowing gently through it. The sunlight filtered down, creating warm patches on the forest floor. They stopped to rest, sitting on large stones near the water. Thomas offered Nayeli some water from his canteen, and she accepted, drinking carefully. He noticed that despite her calm demeanor, her hands trembled slightly, a subtle sign of the stress she had been carrying. Thomas realized that she had been facing danger for a long time, and that her courage had been tested far more than his own. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "I can't imagine how hard it must be." Nayeli looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "We all face challenges," she replied softly, "but some are greater than others. Right now, we need to stay strong and careful. One wrong step could change everything." Her words were serious, but Thomas sensed a hidden hope in them, a belief that if they stayed together, they could overcome the dangers ahead. They continued walking, the forest gradually giving way to open fields. The change in terrain was both a relief and a new challenge. While the open space allowed for easier movement, it also left them exposed to anyone who might be searching for them. Thomas and Nayeli moved cautiously, sticking close to the edges of the fields and using tall grass and scattered trees for cover. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became noticeable, but they pressed on, knowing that stopping for too long could leave them vulnerable. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed signs that someone had passed this way recently. Broken branches, footprints in the soft earth, and disturbed grass suggested that they were not alone. He slowed their pace and signaled Nayeli to do the same. She nodded, her face tense but calm. They moved silently, their senses heightened, every sound amplified in the stillness of the fields. The feeling of being watched was uncomfortable, yet it made Thomas more determined to protect her. He had promised her safety, and he intended to keep that promise. Finally, they found a small grove of trees near a gentle slope, providing cover and a place to rest. They sat down, catching their breath and assessing their surroundings. Nayeli's expression softened slightly, and she leaned back against a tree. Thomas could see the relief in her posture, a momentary easing of tension. He realized that in addition to the physical danger, they were carrying the weight of uncertainty and fear. Each of them was learning to rely on the other, forming a silent partnership built on trust and necessity. As they rested, Nayeli spoke again, her voice low and careful. "We are close to a settlement," she said. "It is small, but there are people there who will not turn us away. We can stay hidden, recover our strength, and plan our next move, but we must reach it before nightfall." Thomas nodded, understanding the urgency. They had come a long way, but their journey was far from over. The thought of finally reaching a place where they could rest safely gave him hope, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They set off once more, moving steadily toward the settlement. Along the way, Thomas began to notice more about Nayeli, her instincts, her awareness, and her skill in navigating the land. She was not just a girl in danger. She was a guide, teaching him how to observe the environment, recognize signs of movement, and anticipate potential threats. Thomas found himself learning quickly, adapting to the wilderness in ways he had never imagined. Their cooperation became seamless, each step and gesture synchronized, a testament to the growing trust between them. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they finally saw the outlines of the small settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys and the sound of voices carried faintly through the air. It was a simple place, modest homes clustered together, but it represented safety, shelter, and a chance to regroup. Niley's face lit up with a mixture of relief and caution. "We have made it this far," she said softly. "But the danger is not gone. We must be careful even here." Thomas nodded, realizing that safety was relative, and vigilance was still necessary. They approached the settlement cautiously, keeping to the edges and observing the people within. Niley explained the customs and rules, guiding Thomas on how to behave, whom to trust, and how to ask for help without drawing attention. The settlement welcomed them, providing food and a place to rest. Thomas felt a sense of gratitude, but also a lingering tension. The world outside was still dangerous, and their journey was far from complete. That evening, as they sat by a small fire near their temporary shelter, Niley spoke of the importance of the bond they now shared. "Thomas, we have faced danger together," she said. "But our connection is more than survival. It is trust, respect, and responsibility. By staying together, we protect each other. We are stronger united." Thomas listened, feeling the weight and truth of her words. He understood that their journey had changed him, shaping him into someone more aware, more capable, and more responsible. The night grew quiet, the stars appearing above like distant points of light guiding their way. Thomas and Niley sat close, not out of romance, but for reassurance and comfort. They had faced the river, the wilderness, and the unknown threats together, and each challenge had strengthened their bond. They shared stories, plans, and fears, learning more about each other with every word. In that quiet moment, they realized that survival was not just about physical strength. It was about trust, understanding, and cooperation. Before sleep, Thomas reflected on the day. He had saved Nayeli's life, but she had also taught him how to survive, how to think ahead, and how to face fear with courage. He realized that true strength was not in acting alone, but in standing together, in facing challenges as a team. Nayeli, too, felt a deepening sense of confidence. Thomas was reliable, brave, and willing to listen, qualities that were rare and precious in a world full of uncertainty. As they drifted off to sleep under the watchful eyes of the stars, they knew that the journey ahead would test them further. The wilderness held more dangers, and the threats from outside their small sanctuary were still real. But for now they had found a moment of safety, a chance to rest, and the knowledge that they could rely on each other. The connection formed by courage, trust, and shared responsibility would carry them forward, preparing them for whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning air was crisp and the small settlement stirred slowly as the sun rose over the horizon. Thomas woke first again, his eyes scanning the quiet homes and the narrow paths winding between them. He could see Nayeli still sleeping, her face peaceful for the first time since the river. He hesitated before waking her, wanting to let her rest a little longer. They had come a long way and the journey had taken its toll. But he knew that today would be another day full of careful decisions and cautious movement. Once Nayeli awoke, they ate a simple breakfast provided by a kind family in the settlement. The warmth of food and a safe place to rest gave them both a brief sense of normalcy. For a moment, the dangers of the outside world felt distant, yet Thomas could not forget the urgency in Nayeli's eyes the night before, the threat that still loomed over her family and tribe. They needed a plan, a way to stay ahead of their enemies while keeping themselves safe. After breakfast, Nayeli led Thomas to a quiet place on the edge of the settlement where they could speak privately. She looked at him seriously, her dark eyes reflecting determination. "Thomas, our situation is still dangerous," she said. "The rival groups are searching for me. They will not stop until they find me. We need to be ready for anything. Survival requires both courage and careful thinking." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned a lot in the past 2 days, but he knew that the hardest challenges were yet to come. They began preparing for the journey ahead. Nayeli taught Thomas how to move quietly through the settlement and the surrounding forest, avoiding unnecessary attention. She pointed out areas that were safer to travel, small paths hidden from plain sight, and how to recognize signs of someone following them. Thomas followed closely, absorbing every detail, knowing that his life and hers depended on their ability to stay alert and act wisely. As they left the settlement, they moved quickly but cautiously, sticking to the edges of the open land and using natural cover wherever possible. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the landscape, making it easier for anyone to spot them. Thomas noticed the tension in Nayeli's movements, the way her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, ears tuned to every sound. Her alertness reminded him that danger was never far, and that even small mistakes could have serious consequences. Along the way, Nayeli shared more about the traditions of her people. She spoke of the importance of family, community, and loyalty. Thomas listened, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge and the strength of her character. She explained how trust and alliances were vital, how connections could provide safety, and how courage alone was not always enough to survive. Her words were both educational and inspiring, giving him a clearer understanding of why she had asked him to stay with her. Their journey was interrupted by a sudden noise in the forest, a sharp rustle of leaves, a branch snapping under weight. Thomas froze, signaling Nayeli to stop. They crouched low, hiding behind a thick bush, and strained their ears to listen. The sound repeated, closer this time. Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline. He had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. Nayeli's hand found his arm, steadying him, and he could see her resolve. Together they watched as a lone traveler passed, oblivious to their presence. The tension eased slightly, but they both knew the danger was still real. As they continued, Thomas noticed changes in Nayeli's behavior. She was quieter, more focused, but there was also a softness in the way she looked at him occasionally, a silent acknowledgement of the bond growing between them. He realized that the trust and respect they had built over the last days had deepened. This was not just survival anymore. It was a partnership based on understanding and reliance. They had become a team, each step taken with the other in mind. By afternoon, they reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills, a winding river, and the distant outline of trees marking the forest beyond. Yet there was no time to admire the scenery. Nayeli pointed toward the valley and whispered, "We need to move carefully. There are groups searching for me here. We cannot take the open paths. We must go through the hidden trails along the river." Thomas nodded, appreciating her guidance. Her instincts were sharp, and her knowledge of the land was a valuable advantage. As they descended the ridge, they encountered a small stream that cut across their path. Thomas thought it would be easy to cross, but Nayeli cautioned him. "The water is deeper than it looks, and the current is strong. We need to be careful. One wrong step could make us visible to anyone watching." Thomas followed her lead, stepping cautiously on the stones and holding onto her arm for support. The river was cold, sending a shiver up his spine, but together they managed to cross safely. It was another reminder that survival often required patience, observation, and teamwork. Hours passed as they navigated the hidden trails. The sun began to set, casting long shadows and turning the landscape into a mixture of light and darkness. Thomas felt fatigue creeping in, but he also felt a growing sense of confidence. He had learned how to read the signs of danger, how to move quietly, and how to anticipate threats. Nayeli noticed his progress and smiled faintly, a sign of approval and reassurance. She too felt a mixture of pride and relief. He was learning, adapting, and proving himself capable of protecting both of them. As night approached, they found a small grove where they could rest safely. The trees formed a natural barrier, and the underbrush provided cover. They built a small fire, careful to keep it low and controlled so it would not attract attention. The warmth and light were comforting, but both remained alert. They knew that the night could bring unexpected dangers, wild animals, travelers, or the rival group still searching for Nayeli. Sitting by the fire, they shared a quiet moment of reflection. Nayeli spoke softly, recounting stories of her family and the people she cared about. Thomas listened, captivated by her words and by the depth of her connection to her tribe. He realized that the bond between them was becoming more than just survival. It was a growing respect and understanding, a recognition of each other's strengths, fears, and courage. Suddenly, a distant noise interrupted their calm, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, of footsteps and voices. Thomas tensed, signaling Nayeli to stay quiet. They crouched low, listening carefully. The voices grew slightly louder, but it was impossible to tell how many people were approaching or whether they meant harm. Nayeli's hand gripped his arm, and he felt the weight of her trust. Together, they decided to wait and observe before making any move. The moment was tense, filled with anticipation and uncertainty. After several minutes, the voices passed, moving away from their location. Thomas exhaled quietly. Relief mingled with the reminder that danger was ever present. Nayeli nodded, her expression serious but calm. "We must keep moving," she said. "Every moment we stay still is a risk. The world outside this grove is unpredictable, and we cannot afford to underestimate it." Thomas agreed, feeling a renewed determination. They packed up their small fire, extinguished it completely, and continued along the hidden trail, staying close and alert. As they walked through the night, the moon cast a gentle glow over the forest, illuminating their path just enough to see without revealing their presence. Thomas noticed how skilled Nayeli had become at moving quietly, how she read the terrain and anticipated obstacles. He admired her abilities, realizing that courage was not only about facing danger head-on but also about awareness, knowledge, and careful action. Their partnership was becoming seamless, each step a testament to trust and cooperation. Finally, they reached the outskirts of another small settlement. Nayeli whispered that this place was more secure, with people who could offer temporary refuge. They moved cautiously, observing from a distance before approaching. The settlement welcomed them quietly, providing food, water, and a place to rest without asking too many questions. Thomas felt a deep sense of relief, but he knew their journey was far from over. The rival groups were still out there, and the challenges ahead would test them further. That night, as they rested in the safety of the settlement, Nayeli spoke again of the bond they now shared. "Thomas, we have survived so far because of trust and cooperation," she said. "We have faced danger together and we have protected each other. But the real test is still ahead. The challenges will grow and we must be ready." Thomas listened, feeling the truth in her words. He had learned that bravery was not just about facing fear, but also about thinking ahead, staying vigilant, and relying on each other. Before falling asleep, Thomas reflected on their journey. They had faced the river, the wilderness, and the unknown threats together. He had learned to trust Nayeli's instincts, to move carefully, and to face challenges with courage. Nayeli, too, recognized his growing strength, his willingness to learn, and his determination to protect both of them. Their bond had deepened, not through words or promises alone, but through shared experiences, trust, and the knowledge that survival depended on them standing together. As the night deepened, the fire burned low and the forest was filled with the sounds of nocturnal life. Thomas and Nayeli sat quietly, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges but confident in their ability to face them together. The next morning, the sky was pale and overcast, hinting at rain to come. Thomas awoke with a sense of unease, a feeling that the world outside their temporary shelter was more dangerous than ever. He glanced at Nayeli, still sleeping quietly beside him, her face peaceful for the moment. He did not want to disturb her, yet he knew they could not linger in one place too long. The rival group searching for her could strike at any time, and the longer they stayed, the higher the risk. Thomas rose carefully, making sure to step lightly on the wooden floor of the small cabin so as not to wake the others in the settlement. Nayeli stirred as he returned with water and a small piece of bread. Her dark eyes quickly assessed the situation, sharp and alert. "We must move soon," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet urgency. "Staying here, even for a day, increases the chance they might find us. We need to return to safer land, closer to my people, before the enemy discovers our location." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. They had survived so far because of careful planning and alertness, and today would demand even more focus and courage. They packed lightly, bringing only essential supplies. Nayeli showed Thomas how to conceal their movements as they left the settlement. She instructed him to avoid the main paths and to use the thick trees and brush as cover whenever possible. Thomas had learned much from her guidance over the past days, and he moved with increasing confidence, carefully stepping on soft earth and watching for any signs of movement. Nayeli observed him approvingly, seeing that he was becoming more attuned to the wilderness and capable of facing the dangers with composure. As they traveled, Thomas noticed the forest around them seemed different today, more silent, more watchful. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They moved steadily along the edge of a ridge, keeping out of sight while using the terrain to their advantage. Naeli pointed out subtle signs that someone had passed recently: broken twigs, footprints in the soft ground, and disturbed leaves. "They are getting closer," she whispered. "We must be faster and more careful." Thomas felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had learned that fear could be useful only if it sharpened his senses, not if it paralyzed him. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon. The sun shone through the openings in the rocky cliffs, creating patterns of light and shadow across the ground. Naeli guided Thomas carefully, showing him the safest path through the rocks and instructing him to move quietly. The canyon walls echoed even the slightest sound, making every step critical. Thomas followed closely, trusting her knowledge and instincts completely. Every muscle in his body was alert, every thought focused on survival and protecting Naeli. Suddenly, they heard voices far above, faint but unmistakable. Naeli froze, her eyes wide and sharp, scanning the canyon walls. "They are scouting," she whispered. "We cannot let them see us. Stay low and keep quiet." Thomas crouched low behind a boulder, watching as 3 men slowly made their way down a nearby path. They did not notice Thomas or Naeli, but the tension in the air was thick. The 2 of them waited patiently, hardly daring to breathe until the scouts moved out of sight. The moment passed, but Thomas felt a surge of relief mixed with a renewed sense of urgency. He realized that the threats they faced were constant, and any small misstep could change everything. As they moved further, the terrain became rougher, the cliffs giving way to jagged rocks and loose soil. Naeli guided Thomas carefully, showing him how to use the rocks for support and balance. Thomas was beginning to notice patterns in her movements, the way she anticipated obstacles and calculated each step. Her skill and knowledge were remarkable, and he felt a growing admiration for her bravery and wisdom. He also felt pride in himself for learning quickly and keeping pace, knowing that every decision he made could affect their survival. By late afternoon, they reached a quiet plateau overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, but Thomas did not have time to enjoy it. Naeli scanned the horizon carefully, her eyes alert for any sign of movement. "We are close to safe land," she said quietly. "But the final stretch will be the hardest. We must move fast before they realize where we are headed." Thomas nodded, feeling both anticipation and anxiety. They had come so far, but the journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The sun began to set as they descended toward the valley. Shadows grew long and the temperature dropped quickly. Thomas shivered, but he focused on moving steadily, keeping close to Naeli as they navigated the uneven terrain. Every step required attention. Every movement had to be deliberate. The knowledge that enemies could be near weighed heavily on them both, but it also strengthened their resolve. They had survived so far because they worked together, and this final stretch would require the same courage, patience, and trust. Suddenly, they heard the faint sound of running footsteps behind them. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. He signaled Naeli to hide behind a rock, and they crouched low, holding their breath. The footsteps grew louder, and the sound of voices carried through the valley. Thomas could see shadows moving along the slope, and he knew that the danger they had feared had finally found them. Naeli's hand found his, and they waited silently, relying on the cover of rocks and trees to keep them safe. After what felt like an eternity, the group passed by, unaware of their presence. Thomas exhaled quietly, feeling relief wash over him. Naeli nodded, her face serious but calm. "We must keep moving," she whispered. "There is no time to rest. They are determined to find me, and they will not give up." Thomas understood fully. Every moment mattered, and they had to continue without delay. Together they navigated the valley, moving quickly but cautiously, staying hidden and alert. Night fell completely, and the moon provided just enough light to see the path ahead. Thomas felt exhaustion creeping in, his muscles aching from the long journey and constant vigilance. Naeli, though smaller and lighter, moved with steady determination, guiding him safely through the darkness. They stopped only briefly to rest, crouched behind rocks or under trees, taking small sips of water and tiny bites of food. The bond between them had strengthened further. They trusted each other completely, relying on instinct, knowledge, and courage to survive. Finally, They reached the edge of the safe land Nayeli had mentioned. It was a quiet area, hidden from the main paths and surrounded by dense forest. The sense of relief was immediate, but both knew that their journey was not yet over. Thomas and Nayeli made a small camp, careful to leave no trace of their presence. They gathered dry wood, built a low fire, and settled down for the night, alert but allowing themselves a brief moment of comfort. As they rested, Nayeli spoke quietly about the bond they now shared. "Thomas, we have survived because we trusted each other and acted together," she said. "The journey has tested us, but it has also shown us that courage, careful thinking, and cooperation can overcome even the greatest dangers. We are stronger together than alone." Thomas listened, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that their journey had changed him, teaching him patience, awareness, and the importance of relying on others. He also felt a deep respect for Nayeli, her strength and her determination to survive despite the risks. The fire burned low, casting gentle light over their faces as they prepared to sleep. The sounds of the night surrounded them, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of animals, and the soft murmur of the wind. Despite the constant threat, there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that they had made it this far together. Thomas and Nayeli had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and they had come through stronger and more united. Before closing his eyes, Thomas reflected on the day. They had encountered scouts, navigated difficult terrain, and relied on each other's knowledge and courage. Every decision, every careful step had been necessary for survival. Nayeli's guidance and bravery had been invaluable, and Thomas knew he had become a stronger, more capable person because of their shared journey. He also understood that the path ahead would demand even more courage and careful thought, but he was ready to face it with Nayeli by his side. As they drifted to sleep, Thomas felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and determination. The journey had been long and dangerous, but it had strengthened the bond between him and Nayeli. They had learned to trust each other completely, relying on instincts, knowledge, and courage to navigate the threats surrounding them. The night was quiet, but the world outside remained unpredictable. They knew the challenges were far from over, yet they were confident that together they could face whatever lay ahead. The morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Thomas awoke early, careful not to disturb Nayeli. She had slept lightly, her senses attuned even in rest. The events of the past days had left both of them exhausted, but neither could afford to let their guard down. Today was the day they would reach her tribal lands where safety and allies awaited. But the journey there was fraught with danger. The rival group searching for Nayeli would not give up easily. Thomas knew that courage, quick thinking, and careful planning would be more important than ever. They began their trek quietly, moving along hidden paths and using the natural cover of trees and rocks. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick forest canopy, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow that concealed their movements. Thomas followed closely behind Nayeli, relying on her guidance and instincts. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them pause, alert and ready to react. The silence of the forest was almost deafening, filled with anticipation and tension. Hours passed as they navigated narrow trails, crossed shallow streams, and climbed over uneven terrain. Nayeli's knowledge of the land proved invaluable. She recognized subtle signs, footprints, broken branches, and other disturbances that indicated they were being followed. Thomas watched and learned, gradually understanding how to anticipate danger before it reached them. Their bond had deepened through these shared experiences. Trust and cooperation were no longer optional. They were essential for survival. By midday, they reached the edge of a wide valley with open fields stretching toward the distant hills. Nayeli paused, scanning the horizon carefully. "This is the hardest part," she whispered. "The fields are open and they could see us from a distance. We need to move quickly but quietly. We cannot afford to be caught here." Thomas nodded, his heart pounding. He could see the determination in her eyes, the courage that had guided her through every danger so far. He knew that if he faltered, they could be exposed and in serious trouble. They began crossing the fields, crouching low and moving in short, deliberate bursts between patches of cover. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of grass and earth, and Thomas realized that even the smallest details mattered. He adjusted his movements, keeping his body close to the ground. Listening intently for any sounds that might indicate pursuit, Nayeli moved ahead, her eyes scanning constantly, guiding him with subtle gestures. The two of them moved as one, synchronized by necessity and shared experience. Suddenly, in the distance, they spotted movement, figures approaching from the far side of the valley. Thomas's pulse quickened. Nayeli froze, signaling him to remain still. They crouched behind a low mound of earth, hidden by tall grass. Thomas could see that Nayeli's face was tense but controlled. She whispered instructions, guiding him to adjust their position, use the terrain for better cover, and remain silent. The approaching figures were scouts from the rival groups, searching methodically for signs of her. Every step the scouts took increased the danger for Thomas and Nayeli. Time seemed to stretch as they waited, hearts pounding and muscles tense. The scouts moved slowly, scanning the fields carefully but missing the small mound where Thomas and Nayeli were hidden. Thomas held his breath, trying to remain perfectly still. Nayeli's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, steadying him and signaling patience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the scouts moved on, heading in a different direction. Thomas exhaled quietly, relief mingled with renewed focus. He realized that survival often depended on calmness under pressure and precise timing. Once the scouts were out of sight, Nayeli led Thomas across the remainder of the valley. Their movements were careful and deliberate, each step chosen to avoid detection. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of the forest bordering her tribal lands. The sense of relief was palpable. Thomas could see the trees beyond, dense and protective, offering both cover and a sense of security. Nayeli's expression softened slightly, a small sign of hope and confidence. "We are almost there," she whispered. "Just a little further and we will be safe." As they entered the forest, Thomas noticed the subtle signs of civilization: footpaths, small clearings, and smoke rising in the distance. Nayeli smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and determination. They moved carefully, keeping to the shadows and avoiding open areas, until finally they reached the outskirts of her village. Families were busy with their daily tasks, children playing near the homes, and the elders observing quietly from porches and doorways. Nayeli stepped forward, confident but cautious. She had explained everything in advance, and the villagers recognized the urgency of the situation. The elders welcomed them quietly, but with clear understanding. Nayeli introduced Thomas carefully, explaining his role in protecting her and guiding them safely through the dangerous terrain. The villagers quickly grasped the significance of his presence. Thomas felt a wave of gratitude and relief. They had made it through the dangers together, and now they were among allies. Yet he knew that vigilance was still necessary. The rival groups could arrive at any moment, and the village's safety depended on their preparation. Over the next few hours, Thomas and Nayeli helped the villagers set up protective measures. They reinforced the boundaries, ensured that lookouts were in position, and shared knowledge about the paths and terrain that had kept them safe. Thomas was amazed at how organized and resourceful the village was. He realized that survival required not only courage but also planning, cooperation, and awareness of one's surroundings. Nayeli's guidance had been crucial, and now he could contribute in ways that strengthened their chances even further. As evening approached, a sense of calm settled over the village. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the rooftops and trees. Thomas and Nayeli took a moment to sit quietly near a small fire. The day's tension had left them both tired, but there was a shared satisfaction in knowing that they had reached a safe place. Nayeli spoke softly, recounting how much they had endured and how they had relied on each other to survive. Thomas listened, feeling the truth of her words. Their partnership had been tested by real danger, and they had come through stronger and more united than ever. Night fell, and the village settled into quiet routines. Families gathered around their own fires, and the elders held watch from vantage points, ensuring that the community remained safe. Thomas and Nayeli remained alert, understanding that even in safety the world could be unpredictable. Yet there was also a sense of triumph. They had faced rivers, forests, scouts, and open fields, relying on trust, courage, and quick thinking to reach this point. The dangers of the past days had shaped them both, and their bond had grown into something reliable and enduring. Before sleep, Thomas reflected on the journey. He thought of the river where he had first met Nayeli, the forest paths they had navigated, and the moments of danger they had survived together. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger head-on. It was about patience, awareness, and the willingness to act wisely in difficult situations. Nayeli's guidance had been invaluable, and her bravery had inspired him to rise above fear and uncertainty. He also understood that trust and cooperation were among the strongest tools for survival, more important than strength or speed alone. Nayeli, lying beside him, felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude. Thomas had proven himself trustworthy, capable, and courageous. They had shared experiences that went beyond simple survival. They had faced real danger together and emerged stronger as a team. She felt confident that the bond they had formed would endure, that he would stand by her and her people in the days to come. The journey had tested them both, but it had also revealed the depth of character, courage, and loyalty within each of them. As the stars appeared in the night sky, casting a gentle light over the village, Thomas and Nayeli allowed themselves a brief moment of rest. They knew that the future would bring new challenges, but they were confident in their ability to face them together. The dangers of the past days had forged a bond built on trust, courage, and cooperation. They had learned that even in the face of great risk, unity and understanding could carry them through. Thomas whispered quietly to Nayeli, "We made it. We survived everything together, and I'm glad you trusted me." Nayeli smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the firelight and a quiet strength. "I knew we could," she replied. "Not because of luck, but because we relied on each other. Courage, trust, and unity, they brought us here." Thomas felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come to the wilderness seeking adventure, but he had found something far more valuable, a true bond, forged in courage, trust, and shared trials. As they drifted to sleep, the world outside remained quiet and calm. The river, the forest, and the fields were behind them, and a new chapter awaited. Thomas and Nayeli had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and united. Their story was one of survival, courage, and trust, showing that even in the most difficult circumstances, partnership and understanding could overcome the greatest challenges.